have wanted to deepen our relationship.
No prejudice, no discrimination. We saw the results of the polls. I was also a bit surprised at the beginning now, but generally speaking, like in soccer, now everybody can run, everybody can kick the ball. So it's a quite a challenging game which we need to compete. But since I have only 30 seconds, I need to be like think globally, act locally. So for all of you who have your notebooks put, must visit 2018 Croatia. Thanks.
I don't think I can add anything to that. I mean,
well, I would like to take a bit from the narrative again from Vice President Katainen. Thank you all for baking today's globalization cake within the format of this award-winning format and forum. So thanks to Martens Center for having held the discussion today, to our panelists and for their very insightful views. And let's hope that in a couple of years we'll be presenting the case study of how we made globalization great again. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Interesting. Yeah.
It was very good. It was very good.
Welcome back, dear ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, dear guests, dear moderator, and dear speakers. We are starting our panel number 5, the last panel of today. Doesn't mean that if it's the last, it's not the best. I'm sure it's going to be the best. We will discuss during panel number 5 how we can build bit by bit the digital single market. But before that, I would like to remind you for the last time of today, I'm sure you heard me saying that a lot of times, that we are live tweeting this event. We've been trending at some point during the day number 1 in Belgium, so well done, social media team. If you would like to tweet, please do so. We would like you to be very active, but make sure that you use the hashtag EIF17. We're also using for the first time today a new digital tool, which is slido.com. So if you have your mobiles in your hands, do go to slido.com, log in with our password hashtag T250, and there we just put up the question for this panel debate, so related to this panel debate. Please answer, and we will try to bring your questions and the result to the speakers. We are also live streaming this event on politica.eu and on all social media, Martens Center social media channels. Last but not least, we have Rafa, who was very popular earlier today. He is drawing and he's amusing us. He's been amusing us throughout the day, and he is trying to portray his vision of what's happening here on the paper. So we'll show his cartoons a little bit later on the screens and on our social media channels. Right, now on the topic of this debate, how do we build bit by bit the digital single market? A few years ago, the European Commission has proposed or has published the digital single market strategy. It included 16 key measures and it followed with 35 proposals. Now, since then, what happened is some member states have made a bit of progress, others have made less progress. So there is still some advance, there's still some good results, but the market still remains fragmented. So obviously there's a lot remains to be done. How do we get there, and how we can build a successful digital single market? These are some of the questions we would like to address our 3 key speakers today, and I would allow me to introduce them to you. Torsten A. Andersen, Deputy Director General, the Danish Business Authority. And just look. I think I'm waiting for. I was expecting that the name would be in front of me.
Better steal him.
Welcome. Erika Widegren, Chief Executive of Reimagine Europa, and Thomas Spieler.
That's me.
Vice President, Public Policy, EMEA at the Walt Disney Company. Last but not least, our lovely moderator today is Salla. She's the advisor for communication and outreach at European Political Strategy Center. Also, a quick reminder to the speakers, you have a short time allotted for your speeches. If you are going to overpass this time, you're going to see our totems. They're going to fill up with flashing light. So you know when this light is going on, you know that you're in trouble. And if you still don't stop, you're going to hear a very annoying noise. Then you know that you have to leave the room. No, they don't have to leave the room. You can stay. It's just to make sure that you pass on the word to the other person. So, Aura, it's your job now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. And I'm very pleased with our panelists today, because as we all know, this is the last panel. It's not always a pleasure to have the last panel, but we will have drinks right after, don't worry. So just hear us out, because when we came in, I told them that let's shape things up a little bit. My work is to work a little bit outside of the box. Even though I'm serving the president of the commission, our aim in our in-house think tank is to think outside of the box, and that's what I want us to do here today. And I have the best expertise here, but I need your help also. I'm looking forward to having great questions from audience after our introductions. So just quickly, if we think about, we have 42 initiatives and 24 legislative proposals from the Commission. Only 6 of them have been adopted. So we are moving slowly what comes to EU side. But what I'm worried about as a person, as a human being, is that only 7% of our small and medium-sized companies sell products cross-border. And 15% of our customers, consumers, shop online. I do it every day, and I think that you do also. I assume so. And 62% of our companies would like to sell more products. So what's the problem? I think that that is the one thing we should face today. So 2 things. I would like to think today from our perspective and then from our company's perspective. And I would like to give floor first to Erika, or from the people's perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Aura. And I would actually really like to start thinking outside of the box, because the thing I wanted to bring up today, this morning I read that Margrethe Vestager had just brought up the threat that big tech companies have to our democracy. And this is something that has been echoed again and again throughout 2017. Words such as fake news, post-truth, alternative fact have become ubiquitous. The Guardian, Wired, many newspapers across the globe have actually talked about how data is threatening our democracy, how they've hijacked the election systems, both in the recent US elections and also during the Brexit referendum. And with the European elections coming up, this is becoming an even more important point to raise. So important that Juncker actually brought this up in his letter when he appointed the new commissioner for the digital economy and society, where he praised that fake news is one of the big challenges of today and that we do need a European approach. This is, of course, very much linked to the economic side, because money and politics have always gone hand in hand. So that's the challenge I want to raise and I want to talk about today is digital single market and our democratic institutions.
Thank you, Erika. This is
no yellow lights.
We started well. Okay, and how about Torsten? Please, what is your response for the first address?
Well, I would basically start with making the point that we still have a long way to go on the digital single market. And even with the proposals on the table, there would still be fragmentation if they are adopted. And this is a real problem for entrepreneurs and companies in Europe. We need to be able to scale up to a European market. Otherwise, we simply won't get the benefits of being able to have the digital companies for the future. So I think that's basically a premise to start out on. How do we address this? And then secondly, I mean, when you start looking at European regulation in this field, you need to keep an open mind to innovation, to how can you actually enforce competition instead of hamper competition? How can you avoid too many admin burdens? How can you keep an open mind so that we're actually at the forefront globally and doesn't harm ourselves?
Thank you so much. Before entering on the stage, we talked about what are our favorite Disney characters, but let's move to digital agenda. Please, Thomas, what is your address?
Well, thanks. First, thanks very much all the EIF team again for another year. When I came on stage, I feel like I'm in a Hollywood studio. I mean, that's pretty good. So good job, guys and ladies. Very well done. 2 things. I want to go back to what you were saying, Torsten. I really think that the very first prerequisite. So I won't go into the different measures and the 42 and the 16. I'm not interested into that. What I'm interested into is that before getting into what you said, we need the right economic reforms set in place in Europe to allow markets in general to function and people have enough money in their pockets to buy the products that needs to be developed. That's the very first thing. And I think that's one of the things that the EIF has been focusing on many years now, for many years now, is this economic reform agenda. Otherwise, that's not going to work. Other regions of the world are very dynamic, and you can see the difference. So very first thing is the economic landscape. Second thing, I think you mentioned I don't want to pick on you, by the way, but you mentioned fragmentation, but I would reverse the argument. We all come from different countries, different cultures, and different ways of doing things. So there will be always be fragmentation. And when it comes to my sector, the audiovisual and cultural sector, because yes, Disney is culture, by the way, in case you were wondering, so I want to make that point, we see those national cultural preferences playing a lot. So yes, we do need more infrastructure, the broadband, 5G, spectrum. Yeah, we do need that, but we also need to respect who we are as Europeans. And I think that more can be done. But let's not forget that those national specificities will remain for some time. And I'm going to give you one example, and I will stop there. Like when you go to Italy, you talk about Mickey Mouse. Nobody knows Mickey Mouse. You say Topolino, the little mouse, yes, they know Topolino, because that's part of the national cultural framework. And I turn towards my Italian colleague to make sure that's what I'm saying is right? All right, good. So I think economy, culture, and the last bit, and it's not flashing yet, is consumer choice. In the briefing book, there is a question about how to scale up. Well, first of all, you need to have a good product, because if you have a crappy product, even if you have a bigger market, you still have a crappy product, and people will not buy it. So I think those are the things that I always like to come back to the essentials before getting into the more detailed. But Europe has a chance here. We do develop great products with great idea, and we have a very mature market for consumers to buy stuff. So let's make sure that this continues to happen before leapfrogging to a new phase that could have unintended consequences. And I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. This is a very interesting start for this panel. Erika, a second round that we have here, I would like to address this fake news thing, because the Commission is working nowadays daily on this topic. And we are addressing the problems here, and we are making the clear link to hybrid and cyber threats also. And there is a part where technology, algorithms, and so on are very important. But there are also some soft powers, how we can answer to these problems. How do you see these media literacy, training, education? What are the tools that how we could tackle fake news in Europe?
I think if I had the solution to how we could tackle fake news, then that would be we would have solved a lot of problems. But I think the point that you mentioned about skills is very important. Yeah. And it doesn't only have to do with fake news. I actually think it has to do with the whole segment of digital single market, because Europeans in general, of course, there are variations between countries, but in general do not have the skills. The majority of Europeans do not have the skills to really play an active role in a digital single market. And if you look at actually the literacy with young people when it comes to online content, there's very little awareness about evidence or fact-checking. So anything that comes from Google is taken automatically as a fact nearly by young people. So there's a lot of things to do there, and this has obviously to do with education, so there's a big challenge there from a European perspective. If this is mostly from a national prerogative. But I do think that skills will be one of the key things, both in terms of computer literacy, but also in awareness, in fact-based, in evidence, and in understanding what authoritative news is or not. Polarization has been mentioned again and again as one of the key problems in our political systems today. And I'm actually working with data scientists and psychologists at the same time in looking how information spreads on the social media today. One thing that's very curious when you talk to psychologists, and you talk about evidence-based and how people do fact-checking, they say actually when people do fact-checking today online, they're not looking to see if the fact that they want to know is true. They're looking to have a confirmation bias. So they're looking to find another source that says what they think is true. And that's why we have this polarization and all these. So I think there's a very big challenge, and it actually goes to the center of our moral systems, our ethical systems, and our values, and what is the role of media or content providers in today's world. And if you go back to Montesquieu's perspective of our institutional systems, the tripartite system, where you have the fourth estate, which is the media, the informal power. Who is the fourth estate today? It used to be the press, the media, you knew who they were. In today's world, who is setting the news agenda in the era of algorithms? And I think that's a very important measure. You saw earlier, now you're having hearings in the US for Russia's place in the US elections. How is this playing out? Who is behind what information we have access to? I think these are very important questions to ask. And what Europe can do in that field will be very interesting to see.
Thank you so much. This is the whole discussion we could have this afternoon, I think, for hours. But I'm turning to our companies now. I'm addressing the same question to both of you. Do you see that the regulation or deregulation or the money? Which are the most important things? We know that we need investments, and as we said, that money and people and companies and business walk hand in hand. But as a company, and when we're talking about the digital single market, which of these three, deregulation, regulation, or money, is the most important thing at the moment, or something else? Please.
Well, it's of course a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So it's not as easy as that. But firstly, I mean, I'm a civil servant. I represent the Danish government. So just to be clear about that, some of what I'm saying is hopefully my personal opinion. Otherwise, this would be boring if I only had purely government-approved things to say. But just to be clear, I am a civil servant. So I think from our perspective, that there is this issue of capital in Europe. I mean, we can see that a lot of the unicorn companies, promising tech entrepreneurs, I mean, they move to Silicon Valley, elsewhere, and scale up. But it's not only for the financing. I mean, it's for the competences and the connections, and it's the market. I mean, that you're able to expand much more quickly. And that's where, I mean, I was not saying that we should have a fully uniform European Union with equal culture in all countries, but I think there is a real issue of companies being more able to move now, and that you need to be able to scale rapidly in this new sort of more disruptive world order. I mean, yeah.
Well, as a company representative, our first duty is towards our shareholder. That's very true. So that's the money side. But having said that, we have a real moral duty as companies to do the right thing. And as Disney, we deal with kids. We've been dealing with kids for 90 years plus. So we try to do the best. We are very concerned, to go back to your point, about the whole issue of social harm online platforms. We believe that there is a risk. There is a risk to all of us, to all kind of companies. Of course, the platforms are in front of that risk, but there is a whole ecosystem behind. Ourselves, we are very busy disrupting ourselves as a company from a traditional audiovisual broadcasting company to a mix of that, plus being somehow a digital player ourselves. But then if people do not, it's a question of trust. Parents, people, kids do trust our company, our brand, but if they don't trust what they can find online, or if they are just looking for validation of what they already think, we are in for real trouble as societies. And it's no longer a business question. It's a question about ourselves as citizens, as private individuals. And we are concerned that this notion of social harm, if it's not tackled properly, so regulation or not, well, that's a good question. The thing with regulation, that there is always unintended consequences that you cannot foresee at the first stage of the regulation. You say, it's a great idea, let's regulate. And then 3 years later, say, well, you know what? That currently not regulating might have very harmful consequences very soon. And again, I like to talk about this notion of social harm. I think there is a risk here, a very fundamental risk to the way we behave as societies collectively. So, just one point back to the indeed scaling up. I think it's a bit of an illusion to always go, try to compare with the US, with Silicon Valley. The Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, and it's a special ecosystem. I think, again, we have great products in Europe, people with great ideas. Access to capital is key indeed, and that part of another type of discussion about how we finance our companies throughout Europe and the notion of risk. But I mean, I don't like to compare too much. I think the real challenge for all of us in this room is going to be Asia. It's going to be China. When you look at the amount of money Asia puts into machine-to-machine learning, artificial intelligence, that's massive. And that's not a threat to the EU. That's a global threat. And how do we answer to that? And the Chinese, it's great culture, great country, a very solid system. And when they want something, they get something. So I think that's the bigger question for all of us, is instead of comparing with the US every time, Silicon Valley or not, or Berlin Valley or Silicon Berlin, whatever, is the next wave. The next wave, as we see it, again, machine-to-machine learning, artificial intelligence, the very big data thing that connects all of us at the same time with our surrounding environment. This is how, and I believe, what Europe should look at. And again, back to the question of social harm, I think we should not overlook that question, that is key to who we are as societies.
I couldn't agree more. And just to say what quote Vladimir Putin a couple of months ago, that who will win the artificial intelligence competition will win the globe. So I think that's something that we should look into also in Europe. So money is important. People are even more important, if I hear correctly from our panelists here. Let's open the floor now to our audience and take the first questions from there. Please. Please. On the first row.
Thank you. I would like to go to the point that Erika mentioned about fake news, and how do the panelists think that the true news that are supposedly being reported by the media, the regulated media, can survive this environment. So how can we guarantee that at least there will be true news reported by someone, so that those who are not biased to try and check only the fake news element can also have a source of reliable information on what happens? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent question about journalist ethic also. Please.
Well, I've been working for over 10 years with big media, so with the likes of El País and Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and it's been a very big challenge, an economic challenge for them, as El País, over the majority of their journalists have had to go. And this is putting a big challenge on the whole question of reliable information. And I think that you're starting to see new approaches coming in. Organizations like science media centers are cropping up to kind of help with the issue of reliable news, helping with scientific information. You're seeing groups like the European academies that are coming up with systems to help both governments but also media to get the reliable information. But I do think that it is a big challenge, and we do need to find a way in which we can have an economic system that makes the newspaper work. A number of different initiatives have been brought up, as well as Google is financing a lot of initiatives in trying to combat fake news. I'm actually working with my chief digital officer on one of the projects. It was precisely finding a legal and economic way to deal with fake news. It's not started yet; it's still in the pipelines. But there are a lot of initiatives, and I think more money needs to be pumped into this to find a solution. So I think that's a very important point, particularly because I think that journalists have a key role to play when it comes to safeguarding, bringing the news, and having a responsibility to the citizens. I worked a lot in science and society relationships, and I've always said that even though it's very good to encourage scientists to talk to society, the most important player in that relationship is to have good journalists to know about the facts and can build the trust with the public, because the public trusts journalists in general. Unless we listen too much to what Trump says, we would think that they still trust journalists. So I think that it's an important part to continue to find money and to finance good journalism.
Thank you so much. Let's hear from member states' perspective. Torsten, please.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I think it is a real issue, and how to address it is a real difficulty. I think as regards what we're we were saying about the sort of the responsibility and the fake news, that part of it, I think, when you look at the e-commerce directive and the parts of the e-commerce directive that sort of governs this today, you have definitely some challenges on how to make sure that somebody monitors the content and whether this is fake news or not. But that today, I mean, you need, at least in the way we've implemented it, you need a court order to take down something, and thereby it's the courts that decides what is legal and what's illegal content. And I think for those aspects of let's say, the platform economy, it's not very clear what is the right choice going ahead. And it will be, I mean, all other ideas involves certain dilemmas, and I think that goes for the newspaper business as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thomas.
Well, we, as part of the Disney family, we own ABC, the news network in the US, which is actually a global news network, but mostly focused in the US. And so we know how bad that can be, and we also suffer from it. But also, I mean, let's be clear, it's also a reflection on ourselves, on our society and our values, which can be scary. And by the way, I will not go into the US politics the way you went, because nothing to say here. But I agree with Torsten. It's about responsibility. It's about responsibility, it's about transparency. And the companies today, I mean, I was in Indonesia recently. In Indonesia, news is Facebook. That's it. People, and it's a very populous country, very young country. Most people have at least, even in low economic backgrounds, have one or two devices. News is Facebook, which is great, I mean, because more people have access to news, but what news? And only one conduit. So you can imagine the potential political consequences in a country which has its own problems, let's put it that way. So just to say that indeed, I believe that responsibility, transparency is important. And I also believe that here, very clearly, we do need regulation, some form of regulation when it comes to platforms, because the risk for all of us is that some countries are starting to regulate individually. And then you're back in the question of fragmentation. You know, France and Germany and other countries are looking at their own laws. And then for global businesses, platform or not, it's going to become very difficult to establish and do business properly in Europe, because then you will face many different national legislation. So here I believe that there is a call for the EU to do something, and I understand that the Commission and the Member States and a number of MEPs are pretty active on that already. And again, it's going to be to the benefit to all of us. It's not anti-platform, because again, we are moving into a platform, to being a platform ourselves as a company. It's just to be responsible. Otherwise, again, I'm worried about social harm.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think that it's harming our democracy also, when we are living more and more in our echo chambers and only socializing with people that are like-minded, and that's very worrisome. And I think the skills and critical media reading are really the key here also. Do we have any questions from our audience on Twitter or somewhere else? Oh, not yet. Let's go to our audience here, please.
So my name is Stergios Konstantinou. I have a question. I believe that fake news on this particular subject is not the most important thing, because I believe the users will reject the fake news providers. The market itself will correct this issue. But I believe what I would like to hear is what I think it's important is what about Bitcoin? What about the integration of blockchain to the European market? I would like to hear about how we're going to use those new technologies and be in front of the agenda, not following the agenda. For example, Europe is behind. We have those technological giants like Google, Apple, Samsung, and Europe is not competitive. So this is an issue we also have to deal with. So I would like to hear more about suggestions about these issues. How are we going to use Bitcoin to be more competitive, or if we are going to create another digital currency. Some ideas like that would be interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting and very topical question. Should we regulate Bitcoin or not? And then also, on on blockchain, smart contracts, is that something that we should move forward or not? I think this is an interesting question. Let's start from here. Thomas, please.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting opening indeed. What reassures me, the banking system, the global banking system, is based on trust. And as we have seen in the past, there have been some issues with that trust during the financial crisis. Anyway, it's still built on trust. It's a heavily regulated system. Some banks complain that it's too regulated. That's not the question. And then you have this new approach, this new philosophy, I think, which is very promising. What reassures me, though, is that when some very large American banks start to integrate Bitcoins into their processes and make it a commercial product. Because if we can merge the best of both worlds, which is regulation, so to reassure consumers and users, so you and me, that we can use those and not being tricked, and it can actually develop more economic models through the more conventional financial flows, I think it's great. And I think for businesses, this is an opportunity. So there will be a first mover advantage. Right now, in many companies, everybody's looking at everybody like who's going to go first and making a more streamlined product at the use of their customers. That's a chicken and egg situation, but I think it's moving. It's moving very fast. In other jurisdictions in Asia, it's much more widespread and much more used, and so far with no major problems. So I think it will come. Do we need regulation? I'm not a financial services or banking expert. The only thing I know is that there is one sector which is heavily regulated, which is the most used today, and one sector which is less. Let's see, but I think having large corporations which are trusted by people, by individuals, by citizens, by consumers, adopt those technologies and make it user-friendly and understandable would be a key advantage. And here Europe has a chance, with or without regulation.
Thank you, Thomas. Torsten, please.
Yes, I think on the more general level, I think that the openness to innovation is the way to be competitive, both for the company and the aligned industries, the industries that depend on the certain industry. And basically, that means that you need to be able to experiment with new business models. You need to be able to sort of introduce new technology. And I think a lot comes from not over-regulating certain areas. I think especially for the financial services in that particular field, you have at least in most Northern European countries I know, you now have these fintech sandboxes where you try out new business models and so on. I know they have it in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Denmark, where you're always trying to sort of set up and develop the new business models, and then afterwards you'll, through experimentation, see how would it actually fit into the regulation. When you sort of, so you turn it a bit around and you allow the innovation to happen, and then afterwards we need to see how that fits into the rules. So that, I mean, that's at least one way of going about this. When I think that's a general point, instead of starting with the regulation, sometimes also starting with new business models and finding out how to adapt the regulation based on that.
Thank you so much. Erika, please.
No, I agree with Torsten on the approach to these things. New technologies is going to set and shape the future. It's not only in the digital single market. It's not only Bitcoin, but if you talk about big data, AI, whether it's in agriculture or in all fields. So I think actually one of the things that we say in Reimagine Europa is that the Europe will have a key role in actually finding a way to address these issues in a more sustainable way, in a way that actually can have a global effect, because each little country by itself in Europe, big or small as it is, will not be able to set standards, but together Europe would be able to do that. And I think it's very important that we are at the forefront of these technologies. There are a lot of initiatives coming out in Europe. We have some two big FET flagship initiatives now coming up on these kind of issues, where there will be a lot of work looking into that. And I think these are very, very important things, because we will not be able to solve the challenges of the 21st century with solutions of the 20th century. So I think these sandbox initiatives and trying out new systems will be the way to go.
Can I add something?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
That what bothers me a little bit with the DSM. Is that I think there is a number of measures which are needed, again, on the infrastructure level, to allow all those new initiatives to be tried. All of us, we try new ideas, new business things pretty much every month, and we see what sticks on the wall and what doesn't. What doesn't, it means the consumer doesn't want it. It's wrong, it's wrongly timed, it's the wrong idea. But there is a number of other measures in the DSM that try to address problem while the market is moving very fast to new solutions that even us, in 3 years, we cannot tell you how content is going to be consumed in Europe, on which device, which format, at which speed, at which price point. What we know is that the consumer is very volatile and tastes change very fast, especially with kids, with teenagers, young adults. If they are bored more than a few minutes, they switch to something else. So try to impose a heavy regulatory framework on something which is moving very fast is not the best proposition, we think, one. But two, we need this big infrastructure in digital, in 5G, in spectrum. Yes, that we need. Otherwise, we cannot even try on new stuff. And then we will never know if it works or not.
Indeed, I couldn't agree more. I think we are very good at regulating the past, but when we should regulate the future, that's the problem. You wanted to add something?
No, definitely. I mean, the fact that it takes 6 years from we spot a problem until we've actually implemented something, start to make it work in a member state is just a problem in the European Union. And we need to look at the way at how we actually address real regulatory problems if we are to sort of survive in this new world. And I mean, what we're doing at the national level is that we are trying to experiment with sort of how can you turn that a bit around, and how can you enter into dialogue with the more disruptive companies.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned here that the EU is not the Silicon Valley. Yeah, for sure not, unfortunately. But and we all agree that we have a fragmented market. We still have 28, soon 27 different regulations and legislations. So what should EU do better to compete with US in the areas of digital innovation and investments? What are these tools and for bring Europe together and compete? Let's start, Torsten, with you.
Well, I actually think the point made formally about not only looking to the US, but looking more to China was extremely valid if we look 5 years ahead, or Singapore or wherever. But there is a big challenge, and I mean I said it a bit in my opening remarks. We need to be able to scale in a European market much faster. And of course, there needs to be the capital available. We need to have the skills. I mean, we're in Denmark, we're number one in this DESI index by the Commission, the Digital Economy and Society Index, and we have a huge lack of anyone being able to be employed in digital economy companies, data scientists, whatever, people with design skills able to apply that as well. So, I mean, we have a huge skills gap. I mean, there's still a lot of areas where we could enter. And then I think the point about trust, that you need to have a trustworthy regulatory regime where you build up trust in, I mean, based on cybersecurity, based on meaningful privacy regulation. I mean, that is key important building blocks.
Thank you so much. Erika, please.
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that the digital single market is just a layer on the normal, on the first single market. And I think that we always try to see it as a separate entity with issues dealing, whilst actually, if you're talking about actually creating a digital single market, it's about also all the other areas that will come into being, whether it's labor laws or consumer protection or IP. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that it's not a separate entity, but it actually deals with all these very complex issues that will be very hard to find an agreement at a European level. And what I fear, and I mean, I think that in general terms, if we want to be a leading economic unit, powerhouse in the 21st century, Europe has to stick together, because it's the only chance we have if we want to compete with the likes of China or the US. And right now we're doing a lot of navel gazing. We're all thinking about, and we're not looking at the bigger picture in a world where it's about numbers, it's about demography, it's about how these things are changing. And Europe, no country in Europe will count 1% of the global population in 2050. That is the reality. So either we stick together and we find a way, and I think those are the bigger challenges that we're looking at.
Thank you so much. Thomas.
Well, I'm going back to my initial point about the economic reform, the very initial structural reform that allowed the European economies at national level to move faster, to move in a freer way. I mean, if we don't have that, the rest will just not follow. That's it. So one. Two, what's the master plan? Where do we want to be in 2050 as a group of countries, a group of people, as a group of culture? What's the big idea? I can tell you, our friends in Beijing, they do have an idea. Whether we like it or not, it's a different question, but they do have a very clear vision of where they want to go. Can they make it happen? They have their own challenges, but still, there is a big vision. I'm not sure that we are there yet. The third, and I'll be more provocative, and I like that, let people become filthily rich. What do you think in Silicon Valley it attracts so much talent? The next guy or the next young woman, she said, well, I can make it too. I have a great idea. There is money, there is universities, there is a whole ecosystem. I can make my first billion before I'm 25. I know some people like this. It's a good proposition. And once they're rich and once they have the big company, then you tax them. You never forget to tax them, though. But otherwise it's a very unequal system. But at the beginning, let's make them like role models and let make success, including monetary success, a reference. And the last point, make science cool in education, in particular with young kids and young children. That's what we're doing at Disney. We have kind of changed over the past years the way we portray characters, like in a number of shows for like 4 to 7 years old. It was a lot about, let's have a party, let's dance, stuff like this. Now it's let's do science. Science is cool. And we promote a lot of girls actually in our shows to do that. The boys are a bit more stupid in our shows lately, which probably reflects some reality, I guess. But it's interesting because it works. It does work. And we see more and more parents, mums in particular, thanking us for doing that. It's quite interesting. So science is cool and is our future anyway.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what Erika said here, I think also what comes to digitalization, we should not think that it's something that is outside of the box, because digitalization is everywhere and it's linked to all our economy and our everyday life and jobs. Do we have any questions from our Twitter followers?
Well, we selected one of the questions actually that we got through Twitter. So it's one of the questions that one of you could answer if you want. So after the end of roaming, Europeans are hoping for the end of intra-EU geolocalization. Are states or big companies blocking this?
I can answer if you want. And the answer is no. The answer is no.
You want to mind elaborate on it?
The answer is that we are companies answering to market demand. If there is market demand for pan-European demand, yeah, we will offer it. We're not crazy. We want to make sales and increase our revenue and increase our profits. That's what business do. If there is no demand, we are not going to propose something that's not going to be bought. So right now, back to my initial point about national cultures, right now the economic model is mostly based on national products for national markets with national preferences. If in 5 years from now it's different, we'll follow the trend. We're not stupid. We're here to sell our stuff, period. So basic answer, it should be much more developed than that, of course. But the basic answer is no, we are following market trends. When we see, the day we spot a big enough opportunity, then we will do it. There will always, 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 in any market under a capitalistic system, an underserved customers. That's the law of the market, always. And we need to address that as well. I'm not saying we should not. But the majority of the market is at least in my sector, I cannot speak for the others, in my sector is very well served. So again, if tomorrow suddenly people say, I want this there, well, we will give them that, believe me, and we will make them pay for that.
Okay, so the big companies are not blocking. Let's say that the big companies are not blocking it. Are the member states blocking it?
Yeah, very bad member states.
That's very, very much put on the spot. No, I mean...
Sorry.
We're not blocking anything. We're a small country, so we can't. But I want to say that as regards the geo-blocking file, which is right now under negotiation, I think our fear is something else. Our fear is that it will confuse more than it will solve. I mean... I'm in charge of these negotiations with some people sitting in the negotiating room, and the fact that sometimes when you do, let's say, passive sales from Germany to Denmark, who's then obliged to take back the product afterwards and so on. I mean, it is really difficult to see what will be the consequences of this. I can't explain it to my minister, what is actually going to be the result of this. And that scares me more than whether we'll adopt it very quickly or not, and it will probably go through at some point. But having some clarity about what is actually the conditions, because you're mixing up many different rules, some from DG Justice, some from DG Connect, something in relation to the e-commerce directive, some in relation to the services directive, some in relation to other areas, consumer rules. It is a lot of rules that you're now, and then you're making another rule on top of it, and nobody can really explain to me what will be the final legislative situation.
That's a good point.
If you don't mind, I would like to ask to have on the screen the slido.com. So we've been asking our participants and our followers to vote on slido.com. It's a question related obviously to this panel debate. So what is the most important benefit of achieving a digital single market? And a lot of the people think that access to new markets for SMEs and entrepreneurs is the most important benefit. Do you mind commenting on it? Do you think this is the most important benefit, or do you see it as maybe not the most important one?
I would like to add, because my next question would have been that let's think this from the small and medium-sized companies' perspective. And I met with some young entrepreneurs from Latvia, and they told me that they are going to Silicon Valley. They want to sell their companies to US because they want to make profit. They want to have the money. So what do you think? How could we help our young entrepreneurs? Not even young, but small entrepreneurs. Erika, please.
Well, I think there's a big challenge in Europe when it comes to SMEs and entrepreneurs. This has been something that we've been trying to find a solution, whether it's to business parks at universities and I always quote a good friend of mine, Sumitra Dutta, who used to be the innovation expert for World Economic Forum. So he's from India. He's worked both at Stanford and at INSEAD. So he knows very well the different fields. And he used to ask his students at Stanford, his European student at Stanford who was starting businesses, why they were starting them there, whilst not in France, for instance. And they always had a very simple answer. They said, well, Mark is starting a company, and if Mark is starting a company, he's not that much smarter than I am, then I can start a company. It can't be that complicated. Whilst in Europe, these things are seen as so complicated, so difficult, you have to be a genius to start a company and make it successful. So I think this idea of role models, which is very prevalent in the US, as well as obviously the fact that people are quite happy to take risks, whilst in Europe you're very risk averse. These are the two biggest real challenges to entrepreneurship in Europe.
Thank you. Torsten.
Well, of course I agree, but I also think that a lot has happened in the last 10 years as regards the willingness and the risk willingness among entrepreneurs. And at least in the Scandinavian countries, the situation is so much different from 5-6 years ago. Today you have much more of a tech entrepreneurship scene, and I think this goes for Berlin, Amsterdam, Paris as well. So we're in quite a different situation to 5 or 6 years ago, with a very vibrant scene of tech entrepreneurs. So in that respect, I think that there has been made a lot of good progress already. As regards whether it's a bad thing always necessary that people move to Silicon Valley, no. I mean, if this means that they get access to the best knowledge in the world and they use that to bring it back to Europe, I think that that is a good thing, because I actually think that a lot of the tech ecosystem of these capitals that I was talking about has a lot of the reason why they have developed so much is because that people come back and they reinvest their money in new entrepreneurs, new skills. So it is actually also very much benefiting Europe that we are able to move into the leading knowledge of the world, that we are able to grasp this, find the right connections and people over there. But of course, I mean, wouldn't it be fantastic if we in Europe had all companies just staying here and becoming global and with 5,000 employees by themselves? Yes, I guess it would, but it's not necessarily the success criteria. As long as we have low unemployment, as long as we have high growth companies, and I think if you look at the overall aggregate productivity of Europe compared to the US, the issue is basically that in the US they have much more companies scaling up very quickly, and they have more companies dying. And the last thing is not necessarily negative, that you're able to have much more companies. If they're unproductive, they'll actually go bankrupt in the US. And that is also something that we could probably learn from in Europe, to have more dynamism in the markets.
Absolutely. We just hope that the people will come back also, so we will not have a permanent brain drain. Please, Thomas.
I can't agree more. I mean, look at France. I mean, they changed the bankruptcy law, and that changed a lot, because then you can try again, and you don't have a black mark at the French National Bank on your record. I know, not that guy, because he went bankrupt once. You start with that, and then we don't need single market regulation for that. We just don't. We let those people try. They fail. They succeed, they fail again, whatever. By the way, Silicon Valley is, I mean, yes, it's great, but, you know, they have earthquakes, they just have terrible fires. I mean, it's nice, but, you know, it's...
You are now in Brussels, weather...
Yeah, but, okay, it's true that in Silicon Valley the sushis are better. But the point is that I do believe that there is a number of things which are already happening in member states, which we don't actually need regulation. It's just happening, because a number of small levers at the national level have been uncorked, if you want. One, and two, people are, you know, they like emulation, so they will try their own thing, and many will fail, and that's okay. The very last point I want to make is about, indeed, it's about scaling up. It's about taking ideas wherever they are best implemented, and some might not be in Europe, and again, that's fine. SMEs, back to the poll there on the screen. Even for companies like us, we do depend on a huge supply chain of SMEs in Europe. So if the DSM, if the only thing the DSM can do or could do is unlock and make access to market by SMEs easier, great. Everybody will win, including the big ones, which are more established like us, because we need a new idea, you know, from that little shop somewhere in Latvia or in Portugal or everywhere. So everybody will benefit. And if it's the only benefit, then I love the single market.
Thank you so much. I think now it's time for our audience also to have more questions. Please, the fastest one here.
And you have a question in the back here.
There.
Thank you. Simon Godwin from the Impact Assessment Institute. So behind everything that we're talking is legislation, you know, part of the digital single market, you know, 42 initiatives, all of this kind of stuff. Now, our institute, we're currently conducting a study on how the European Commission does digital assessments in its impact assessments for legislation. And in particular, how it uses its digital tool in its better regulation toolbox. So I'm not going to go into the details of what we found, but it leads to a couple of questions. So the first question is, how do you think that the European Commission has enough knowledge and expertise and understanding of the digital space, especially considering that it's a space which is very new and which is changing all of the time? Do you think that the European Commission engages sufficiently well in a transparent and open fashion with stakeholders and experts in order to feed that knowledge that it needs? And thirdly, do you think, or do you see the danger of, let's say, a politicization of legislation? So not basing necessarily on evidence and facts, but basing more on political imperatives, because it's such a prevalent issue at the moment, because it's so much in the news, and because it affects so many people.
Thank you, an excellent question. And also I would add there, and how would you improve the system if you think it's not working? Please, Torsten.
I think there is definitely a lack of knowledge about the digital world and how it functions in let's say, the European policy community, without pointing fingers particularly at the Commission. for example, for e-government solutions, I mean, we have a number of proposals on the table of let's say, making more e-government solutions in Europe. And I think from having a lot of experience with e-government solutions throughout the last 20 years, and you can't do anything in Denmark which is not digital, you can't fill out any form in paper anymore. I think what we've realized for the last 5 or 10 years is that that's one thing, but if you just digitize something, you'll just move the bureaucracy. I mean, that's not user-friendly in itself. Where it becomes user-friendly and saves time and is a reduction of admin burden is the second when you actually know what you're doing about how to make a user-friendly web page. And that is very, very difficult and requires a lot of time. So there's no doubt that this part of it is very important. Then secondly, we've been asking for the past 5 years for going through the EU acquis and seeing if it actually functions in a digital world. And that it would be a bit of similar to what you're saying in as regards impact assessments. So basically a refit based on the digital world, and that would be a specific way of going through all existing acquis. I think you shouldn't forget also the level of comitology, of implementing acts. I have specific examples of where I have had a proposal from the Commission for a comitology decision where they actually ask still, this was last year, they still asked for a fax number, and they still obligatorily, the member states had to, when they had to ask companies for something, we had to ask for a fax number, and we had to, ask for a stamp. Everything had to be stamped physically, and everything had to be filled out, and returned and so on. So there is a big issue of actually enabling legislation to be administered digitally. And you can't just, you don't just wire legislation when you want to make it digital. At the Danish Business Authority, we're also the Danish Companies Register. And basically what you need to do when you go through all the legislation, you need to get away with, when lawyers have this margin of maneuver, when you have to make this individual assessment of cases. You can actually automate all e-government solutions. The second, where you say, instead of saying there has to be a substantive part of something, you say there has to be more than 50%. You say more than 50%, then you can automate everything. If you say there has to be a substantive part, then you can't automate it, and you need to have tons of lawyers approving everything. So we've had, for the past 6 years, we've gone through all the acquis of registering companies, of re-registering, of boards, of accountancy, so on, based on this, and now we've basically have 90% savings. We've gotten rid of most bureaucrats actually doing this, and you're able to do that. You can do that, and you can make the savings also for companies. But it is a huge effort, and it definitely needs to be implemented also at the European level, because we now have the problem that a lot of the EU legislation is simply not digital when we then receive it and tries to implement it through our digital one-stop shops.
Thank you so much. I received one fax when I entered the commission. I had to attend to that event because they invited me via fax. Please, Thomas.
Yes, no, yes. Jokes aside, but no, it's not a joke, it's really what I think. How do you want a public body, which is here to propose legislation, to be fully mastering a very complex space when companies which are the heart of the products, they don't even know what's going to be the next big thing in, again, 3, 4, 5 years. They try. Some stuff works, some doesn't. It's just not possible. There is a pace of technology, and there is the customer, the end user, how they grab it and how they change themselves, the use of the technology, to then for the company to go to the next thing. And that nobody can it is going very fast, and it's very hard to predict. And they are trying hard, and the big Silicon Valley earthquake, fire type place, sushi place, they are trying very hard, and they are putting billions again on AI, for instance, artificial intelligence. But they don't really know how it's going to come up from a product perspective. And then if you try to regulate that, good luck. I mean, because if the big-minded engineers at the very heart of the product, they don't know who does. So there will always be a disconnect, but I applaud the efforts of the Commission to try to put it in a way which is legally constructed, because as society we are based on rules. But I wish them good luck.
Thank you. Erika.
I would like to respond to your question about evidence-based policy making and the risk of politicizing issues. I don't think it's something that's going to increase. I think it's always been that way. But I actually think that there's been a lot of efforts in the past years by the European institutions to set up meta-structures or bring in organizations that can help with this. Sense About Science just launched at an EU level. SAPEA, the Science Advice for Policy of the European Academies, is now starting to work. So there's a number of initiatives working in that direction. Is that enough? Not at all. There's a lot that needs to be done. And it fits into a whole ecosystem. But I think the solution there is really looking at best practices that we have around Europe. The UK has a lot of excellent best practices in trying to help evidence-based policy making and emulating those at a European level. So look at what could work in Europe and bring in those meta-structures to try and avoid the politicizing of issues and making sure that facts and evidence becomes more important in reforms and in legislative procedures.
Just one funny anecdote. It's interesting to see that the department at the Commission, if I'm not mistaken, which has added the biggest number of data scientists over the past few years is the DG Competition. That says a lot. I will stop there.
Thank you. I have 2 more questions from audience I will take, and the answers have to be quite short. I know that's my first one. Please. Yeah, I saw that we are thinking like-minded.
Thanks very much. I've really enjoyed today. I've had a lot of really exciting buzzwords like blockchain, artificial intelligence, cloud, internet, and all of that is impossible without open source. So I work for Red Hat. I'm James Lovegrove, and open source is key to our business. I had a question with regards to something which was a big theme of the morning about data being the sort of black oil of today. I think the interesting thing about the sort of fear, the risk that we see in this room is that we somehow missed the boat, the digital boat. However, if this data is open, it's interoperable, it's portable, it can be monetized in Europe, it can be processed in Europe, it can be developed in Europe. And I think sometimes we're a bit gloomy in Europe. We tend to be a little too pessimistic. And yet the solutions, perhaps under our very nose, is that there are 16 million developers in open source, a lot of them in Europe. Linux is born in Europe. And I would like to point 2 questions, if I may. Torsten, to Denmark has a great track record of open source and open data, the extent to which that's been a feature, a factor of your #1 ranking in DESI. And then to Erika, this question of digital or computer literacy, the extent to which you see open source as being an important literacy to kind of unlock the genie in the data in the single market. Thanks.
Thanks so much. So where there is a will, there is a way. And then we have a final question here, and let's pull the answers after that. Our microphone. Yes.
Thank you, Aura. My name is Kaisu Karvala, head of digital FIBRA. I have to say it because everybody thought I still work for Angry Birds, but I have to give credit and maybe more comment to our fellow Disney. You were our role model. We were a small Finnish application company that made a game called The Angry Birds. What we did afterwards was a movie in Hollywood. So I would like to actually tell to us that shame on us. We do actually have quite decent digital single markets in the application side, in platform side, in service side. We just whine our asses off here in Brussels bubble instead of actually delivering to our customers, because we do have very good services, and those guys who go to Silicon Valley tend to be Europeans. So actually, instead of complaining, let's build the digital Europe together, because it's something that we can't complain to the Commission that you regulate wrongly. Like you asked, how would you do it differently? It's a shame that there's not nobody from the Commission but you, probably. So I would actually want us, as the business people, take the ball back to our court and say, we are the digital Europe. We will make it happen. We did with 150 people. We had 7 terabytes of data per day, and we had 3 billion downloads. So not a question, but really home duty to all of us. Let's really make the digital Europe ourselves and not complain to Commission that they do actually something wrong.
Thank you so much. Maybe because there was not an exact... Yeah, please, there is last one.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really. I am a student from the University of Latvia, and I am from China. When I am listening, I heard a lot of times of China, this word, and
Latvia once.
Okay, and dear Vice President, okay. When I heard your remark, really impressed me because you said that when Chinese when they want something, they will always get something. I will take this as a compliment.
It was.
Yeah. Okay. Then, because for now, actually, Chinese goods are labeled like low quality, and for example, when I was in Latvia, I asked my colleagues where can I buy some cheap clothes, and they taught me. That go to the central market because they are goods from China, and even the taxi with logo of a panda, they said that it's cheaper, and I think so that's the situation, and I think we still have a very long way to go because as for Chinese, especially for the young people, they are very admire the living style or the education or the products of Europe, and I think I want to know what do you think the role of China in the digital single market, and I think we can have more cooperation other than just competition, and I really hope that So
thank you so much. So. This will be a final round, and I will start with Torsten because the first question was addressed to you, and then Erika, and then Thomas. Please.
Yes, well, briefly on let's say, open data, open innovation. Yes, I think from a regulatory perspective, it's about keeping competition and keeping market barriers low as you can in all different fields, and in this case, if it can contribute to this, then it will contribute positively to economic growth. So I think it's one way of sort of ensuring that. And as regards China, I do definitely believe that we should work with China, and I think that a lot of European digital companies already are, and a lot of countries, and I think that would be beneficial. I mean, we need to work with everyone in a global world.
Thank you so much. Erika.
I wanted to agree with the position that we shouldn't be too harsh on ourselves, and then go back to the literacy point, because today, actually, when it comes to big data and these things, some of the leading professors of the world are based here in Europe. We have the actually, from a human capital perspective, the best chance to come in leading the era of big data. Question is, how don't we squander it? And I think that that's the biggest challenge for Europe, because we do have the expertise. When you're looking at complex network scientists, the best ones are all sitting here in Europe already. So I think that we do have a lot of assets. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue with more skills at schools and teaching children how to get more digital, becoming more literal and from a digital perspective. But we do have a lot. We do have a lot of assets, and I think we shouldn't forget that. And we should try and find ways to actually keep them here in Europe and make them do really interesting things, because we do have a big opportunity to be at the cutting edge in the future.
Thank you so much. Thomas.
3 things quickly. James' question, absolutely. And actually, it's interesting to see. We do not see contradiction between open source on one hand and strong IP protection on the other hand. As Pixar, which belongs to us, we do a lot of open source actually to produce our animated features, and it's just great. So I agree with you, James, as usual. Absolutely, of course, yes. We are the DSM. Let's just make it happen. But also, let's be clear that we need to show citizens the benefits of what we are doing, and otherwise we will lose that particular connection. And which leads me very quickly to Torsten's earlier comment about e-commerce and consumer rules online. That we need to do a better job. That I agree, there is a need for regulation. Otherwise, it's a real problem. Our colleague from China, listen, great country, fantastic market. 3 things. One we just opened last year, our Shanghai Disneyland, and it's amazing. We are very surprised by the speed of the success and the speed of the acceptance of this product by the Chinese consumers. And 90% of the consumers there are Chinese. They are not foreigners. They live there and just go with a kit, and it's great. And thanks to that park, we developed new technologies actually for the Chinese population. So there is a need. You talked about living standards and models. There is a need. There is demand there. So we are filling this demand. To China data and the big data world, it's not surprising that it's Jack Ma, the CEO of Alibaba, who is the first one who start talking like 1 year ago about like a world e-commerce organization project. You know about that? It's not a surprise. You have massive companies, Tencent and Alibaba and many others that we don't even know here in Europe, and they have their eyes on the global market, the Chinese market first, because the base on which it will build is already enormous, but they have their eyes on the global market. So it's not a surprise that this country is pushing very hard through private Alibaba or public actors to go to the next phase. And again, it's about the vision thing. What is our vision? Maybe we will hear that in the closing speeches. But don't be afraid. Just go out there, go outside of your very nice and huge country, because there is a demand for your product, and the branding image will change, is changing. In my sector, believe me, we are watching with some interest with the... Okay, one anecdote and I will stop there, I promise. Kung Fu Panda, the movie, which is not a Disney movie, by the way, right? I shouldn't talk about it, but anyway. Really impressed the Chinese leadership when they saw it, because they said, well, it gives a positive image of Chinese culture and tradition. It doesn't mock at all. It is well done. The costumes are right, the landscape is right, the music is good. And I know, it was told to me by a very high-level Chinese official in the culture department, said, how come we don't do that? Why is the Americans doing that type of product, which describes China the right way, or China's history the right way? And from then, they say, well, we need to make movie production, quality movie production for the global audience a priority. And again, back to the vision thing. So, do it.
Thank you so much. At this stage, I want to thank our great top-notch panelists. And President Juncker told the heads of states in Tallinn that with political will, it is possible to achieve digital single market. But I want to add there that with us, with citizens, with our business in Europe, we can achieve that. So let's make digital single market happen. Thank you.
I would like to quickly take it from here, and I would like the audience to ask you to stay where you are, because we left the best for the last. And we have 2 opening remarks, and we would like to invite to the stage our EPP Secretary General and also Secretary Treasurer of the Wilfred Martens Center, Antonio López-Istúriz White, Secretary General.
Thank you very much. The best was produced before me, and it's all of you. Thank you for participating. I see a lot of young faces around, and this is motivating, and it's very good. I would like to thank, by the way, you cited my titles, but my title is that I was the one paying the bills for this event. And I see now that it was some money well invested. Thank you, Tommy, and all the people in the Martens Center, because this has been outstanding 2 days. And even the setting, I love it. And it's getting better every year. So thank you for that. I'm not the only one paying, and I want to cite the sponsors. I always do, because they are helping us in these endeavors. In this case, for this panel and for these days, it has been UPS, Sky, and AT&T. Thank you for collaborating with us. And I would like to thank the panelists, Erika, Torsten, and of course Thomas, my good friend. Ora, if everybody in the Commission would be as dynamic as you, chairing debates, it would be much more fun, our interaction with the Commission. But thank you for that, and for chairing that, and for all the panelists that during these 2 days they have participated in the debates. Money is important, but people are more important. This is the phrase that I have taken out of the discussion. I was this weekend, I'm a politician, and sometimes we have to remember for who we are working. I was this weekend in a refugee camp in Jordan. And there was this little girl who came to me and asked me for something. She was asking, and I had nothing, and I gave him a little ball pen from the EPP. And she was taking like it was a birthday present. She was so enthusiastical. And she told me, she tried in English, she was Syrian refugee. And she told me, she said, please come every day. These are the kind of occasions when we have these discussions that we all have to remember who we are working for and what are the values and the principles that we are defending. Money is important, true, but people are more important. And this is the basis of the discussion of the EPP and how we work and how we operate. After all, our thinkers, our founders, which were the founders of the European Union, they said it very clearly. We work for the social market economy. We love you to produce initiatives, to go on. Business people are our model. They are working in a very difficult ambience, against all odds, creating startups. And I know politicians, we are many times in your way, with very difficult red tape, with very difficult regulations that you have to overcome, especially here in Europe. We are working a lot, and I praise the work in this occasion of the Commission, this latest Commission, the one of Jean-Claude Juncker, for working hard. And we have always had this so-called and attacked liberal agenda from the left for the European Commission and what is the EPP. And liberal in the sense, I love to be attacked on the sense that we want to liberalize as much as possible and we want enterprise to work because we want to create jobs. But we cannot lose the focus. I think it was in the last Economic Ideas Forum I was introduced to this Indian guru who was the creator of this fantastic banking internet. And during half an hour he explained to me, and I was amazed. And this is the present and the future. And he was telling me how he was operating. The guy was no more than 25 years old, something like that. And he was already operating a bank in internet, through internet, that was moving, I don't know, $20 billion at that moment. I don't know. I was impressed. And he was explaining to me, and then I made the classical, question, but not classical. As a politician, I told him, I said, this is incredible. And how many people do you have employed in this fantastic bank? He said, 12 people. Uy. You see, I told him, this is my problem. If this bank was created in a traditional way, this would be 12,000 jobs. In this model, it's 12 jobs. I have 11,900 and I don't know how many jobs lost. Believe me, I'm not against. This is the present and the future. We cannot go against that, of course. We have to help, but we also have to be aware of the consequences. Thomas put it very clearly. Responsibility, thank you for saying that. I know Disney works on that, always. Especially with the public. They are their aim, young people and so on. So responsibility is essential for your company. But it has to be for everybody. Some days ago, I was in a very restricted forum. And I had the opportunity, it was a privilege, to make a question, also to some panelists. And the question was produced by former Secretaries of State, Condoleezza Rice, John Kerry, and myself, to a guru of internet, and about the new digital technologies. And with the three, we agreed to make this question. Do you have any kind of ethical discussion between the digital enterprises about the future, the consequences, about what we are doing? All of us? Politicians, we're having a lot of discussions, I'm telling you. But do they have the enterprises this debate, ethical debate? I think that there has to be. Maybe some of you told more, less regulation, I don't know. This is what's going on in the debate in the European Parliament and in so many parliaments around the world. Can we rule internet or not? I'm in favor of freedom. That's what I am in the DPP, and I'm not in the left. But at the same time, there has to be some responsibility. We all love to speak in Europe about rights. We all have many rights here in Europe, but no one talks about duties. This is the problem. And this is what we have, especially you, young people, to take into account when you make your startups, when you make your enterprises. We want to be there for you. And people like me, you know, in DPP and so on, we will always work so that you have the best ways to produce and that your creativity is helped. But please, also you, take into account and study very well what is the ethical dimension and the consequences of what we are doing. If we all go in this same line, then globalization will not be such a problem. Because there is a problem now. Globalization is seen as a negative thing by our citizens. In my case, by my voters. I cannot tell them about the good things of globalization. They don't understand me. They are losing jobs. They are losing economical power. Some of them, they even say they lose identity. Now that we have some problems in Spain about identity and in some parts of Europe. We are losing identity to globalization. Be careful. That's what we have to work with. In Europe, these are the values I defend. You were speaking about China, my Chinese friends. We have to do business. But about political models, I know what is the one I'm defending. A European model, it has taken centuries for us to realize after colonization processes, after creating so many problems to the whole world, finally, after 2 world wars, we discovered that we could do something much better to the world. And we created the European Union. This is a very different and I think productive and respectful approach to the world than the one before. I cannot tell my Syrian friend that her problem started when us Europeans, we created her problems with our decolonization dramatic problems that we created about that. We are responsible for that, the Europeans. But that's why we created a different system. Not perfect. It is not perfect. We all know that. But I think that is working. And it is an example. And I will invite other countries that they should do the same thing in the next future. If we want to compete in the same terms and with the same approach. We have to do many things inside Europe, many reforms. I praise the reforms that were made by some European governments. Here is María Luisa Albuquerque, former Minister of Finance of Portugal. She had to take the tough road, the very, very difficult decisions, like Mikolas Dzurinda in Slovakia. They had to take the decisions to reform our economies and to save our economies in very difficult moments. We are less imaginative than the left or the populists. We are serious. Sometimes they tell us that we are boring. But we are the ones to save our countries and our people from the imagination of others. Thank you for that. We have also to unleash the creative energies of Europe's economy. We have to keep our welfare system. Everybody envies us, Europeans, because of our welfare system outside of the European Union. I'm half American, I'm telling you. I'm much more relaxed being a Spanish citizen because I don't have to pay for my healthcare system. They will take care of me. In the United States, it's not the case. If I don't have the money, I have a problem. So, there are many things that we have that they are good in our system and others that we have to change. Europe has to be a Europe that protects. That was the anthem, the slogan of our Congress in Malta. But also, it's not a protectionist Europe. So I invite other colleagues from other countries, from China, Russia, and from many other countries, India, to follow the same steps. We have to trade, we have to be open, but responsible. To all of you, continue. Continue with your work. The future is digital. Through this discussion, we are building not the rules, but the way that this future world is going to be. Sometimes when I hear about these initiatives, I get afraid. They tell me that sooner or later, if you eat something out of the fork that you are eating, they will know, they can check what are the illnesses that you have. And this will go into a computer, and someone will know if you have cancer. And this might affect your employment. But in the other side, they also told me that young in the hospitals, in a hospital in the United Kingdom, they had an initiative, and there was a problem of asthma for young people. Especially there is a problem of asthma, lung diseases in our societies because of the contamination in many of our industrialized cities. They had an initiative. They felt that they didn't have enough data of children about their diseases. They have to go every 3 days to every day, 3 times. They have to use a special tube where they have to inhale, and then with that data, they can collect and see what is the evolution of the illness. Of course, they didn't have any data because the children didn't want to inhale, because every time they were doing, they were reminded that they had the illness. So they created a game, a digital game, sifling in a game, interactive game between children. And now the children are producing the data that they wanted, which is good. And it has reduced 30% asthma problems in this hospital in the United Kingdom. And this is also saving, by the way, money to the health system. So we have good and bad examples. Let's work with them. And that the future does not bring this fear to our people. That with these good solutions, they see the good things that can contribute to their well-being in the future. So these are the things that we are discussing today and yesterday in the Economic Ideas Forum, in name of President Djurinda, on the Martens Center, and in DPP, the European People's Party. Thank you all for participating, and I hope that next year you are so interested that next year we'll be here again, and that we continue with these fantastic debates that I hope that they will produce, especially for you, young, the reflections for the future. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Secretary General. I would like to call on Tommy Huuttinen, the Executive Director of the Martens Center, to wrap up this inspiring event and also to call on you to join us for a cocktail reception. Tommy.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It has been an exciting, long day. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for your exciting, inspiring speech. I'm not going to try to summarize all the 5 panels what we had today, but trying to summarize in maybe one observation and a little bit in perspective of Economic Ideas Forums in the past years. When we started 8 years ago, Economic Ideas Forums, it was in the midst of economic crisis. And from that point on, our discussion was really how to get out of Europe out of the situation we were in. But then, a couple of years ago, when we actually started to organize meetings here in Brussels, the situation changed. For the first time, we didn't speak anymore about crisis, but we started to look for the possibilities. But if you look like macroeconomic data now and look at Europe, especially comparing to the United States, actually it's a pretty positive, 2 to 3% growth in GDP. So my question is, why didn't it didn't reflect the debate today? today's debate was not negative, but not too optimistic. And I think it is because we know that at the moment it's not about the 2 or 3% growth. The big question is somewhere else. And I think Gunnar Högmark put it very well when he said that there is a big question of future. We are looking like me, I'm looking at the television of myself, but I know that the reality is somewhere beyond. And the question is, are we able to address that? So the question is really about choice. I think that would be the momentum how I would describe it. I would like to thank the audience. I think you were great, very much participation. I would like to thank the speakers, Mandatory Secretary General, the panelists, our sponsors, AT&T, Sky, Disney, UPS. So it's very much appreciated. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. Especially, I want to, of course, thank the Martens Center staff, all the people behind, especially who is the man who is actually the father of the Economic Ideas Forum. It's José Luis Fondalba. So come in light. José Luis, now I force you. Come in and raise your hands. So you know, in all workplaces, there's those who make all the work, and then all the rest take the credit. But José Luis is really who always makes it happen. In his team, we have had, especially this year, Jona Lung, our senior member, and Richard, who have made a huge effort. But of course, all the Martens Center team, and also where is Katerina? There. Wasn't she fantastic? So thank you for our involvement from the EPP. So just before I let you fly to the cocktail for networking, etc., I still want to mention about the next year Economic Ideas Forum. Because as you may know, we have done this. We started 5 years, we did it in different capitals, then 3 years we have done it in Brussels. But now the sensation is that nearby there's a country where there's a lot of talk about reform, and it's not very far away, actually an hour and 20 minutes by train. So next year, already in spring, we are planning to have the Economic Ideas Forum in Paris. I'm sure that many of you can make it, but if you don't, we are going to stream it online, so watch out. And very much looking for seeing you. So welcome to the Economic Ideas Forum 2018. Before that, welcome to cocktail. And thank you. See you in the next Martens Center activity. Thank you.